Morning guys, welcome back to another video. As you can see from the title, we're talking about more reasons that I personally would not move to New Zealand. I made a video a few months ago going through my top 5 reasons why I wouldn't want to live in New Zealand long term, and it got a lot of negative attention. The amount of just incredibly cruel and mean comments I got on that video has inspired me to actually make another one, which is kind of funny. Before we get into this, I'm going to link a video right now about my top 9 reasons why I would move to New Zealand. New Zealand has a ton of pros, an endless amount, I would say. It's an amazing country to live in. It is absolutely gorgeous. The people are incredibly friendly. It does have some downsides, which we're going to get into, but I just want to let you guys know before you get fired up and go wild in the comment section and decide you're going to be a horrible person. Just know that I love living here and I think it's amazing. It's just not the right fit for me long term. And these are some of the reasons why. So first on this list is healthcare. Don't get me wrong, I'm from Canada. Our healthcare system is nowhere near perfect. And in saying that, Canada is nowhere near perfect. I could make a huge list of reasons why I wouldn't live there long term, but we're not going to do that today. Stay tuned for a video down the road about that. What I will say though is when you're moving to a new country, it can be a little bit difficult to get healthcare in whatever country you're moving to. So for example, in Canada, I can walk into a walk-in clinic. Sometimes I can make an appointment. I can give them a phone call, and when I do have my appointment, I go in there, I wait a minute or two, see my doctor, and I'm in and out in 5-10 minutes. All good, done, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. My experience with healthcare in New Zealand, however, not so good. And I did talk about this in a previous video, which I'll link here in case you want to check that out. But I'm going to summarize for you real quick. Basically, I needed medical attention. I called around. I called a local GP or general practitioner's office. The person there told me that I was not able to go in to see any doctor anywhere, that I would have to go and sit in emergency for 6+ hours in order to see a doctor to get just like a very basic prescription. So I spent hours researching how I could avoid doing that. I really wasn't feeling well. I ended up finding an online practice, which I called, I had an appointment with, and I got a prescription the same day. So that was amazing. The downside is it took a really long time for me to find this as an option, and it was incredibly expensive. Just for the appointment alone, which took maybe 10 minutes, cost me, I think it was 95 New Zealand dollars. The prescription was affordable, which was amazing. I think that was around $30. And once I got the medication, everything was good to go. Now, after that experience, I did a little bit more digging and I started to read a lot of articles and information about how poor the healthcare system is in New Zealand. They're losing a lot of their doctors and nurses to overseas, especially Australia, for pay. And there's also a lot of instances where people that work in the healthcare sector are just unsafe. They're getting attacked by people in the hospital and they're getting verbally abused simply because the wait times are so high. People are taking it out on the medical staff. This is a really dangerous and really scary thing because it's going to deter a lot of people from going into that field in this country. I don't have any medical issues that are like long-term health issues, but if I were to develop that at any point in New Zealand, and I wasn't a full-on citizen and had rights to healthcare, I would be really concerned about getting proper care. Even if I had full access to the healthcare, I would still be concerned that I would not be getting top quality healthcare and I wouldn't be able to get it in the times that I would desperately need it. So this is a huge deterrent for me and definitely a factor in me deciding that I don't want to live here long term. Number 2 on this list is no overtime pay. So let me delve into this a little bit more. In New Zealand, the law states that an employer is not required to pay you overtime rates. So that means if you're working past your regular 8.5 hour day, you're not going to get paid time and a half, what we would call in Canada, or double time for something like a holiday. And that is unless it is written in your employment contract. So in New Zealand, their big thing is an employment contract. Every job that you're going to get, you're going to have a pretty detailed employment contract that states whether or not you're going to get paid overtime rates, what the holiday situation is going to be, and it's going to be all really broken down. The ones that I've received here have mentioned that you should go and talk to a lawyer and get help going through every part of this contract before signing it. So it's a pretty big deal. But it is something worth noting, especially if you're coming here and you're going to be a salaried employee. You're already going to get paid not as much as the same job in somewhere like Canada or Australia. But if you're going to be working longer hours, you're probably not going to be properly compensated for it unless you really negotiate that before you start your job. So, this is a really important point if you do want to move here. Make sure you're reading through that employment contract. And if you think you're going to be working a lot of overtime, get those better rates because it's not written in the New Zealand Labor Code. Number 3 on this list is attitude. This is something that really surprised me about New Zealand. I find it's mostly directed at men. This attitude of shutting up, being quiet, never complaining. I think they call it whinging here. Don't whinge. Whinge? I think British people use that term as well, but basically is like a don't complain, make the best of your, not even like make the best of your situation. It's almost like a don't talk about your problems, don't seek help for mental health. This whole thing of just like pushing down your feelings and not being honest with people, not showing emotion, not being able to communicate properly with people if you're feeling upset or hurt. And I think that's just such a toxic mentality, especially for young men to adopt. And like I was talking about the negativity on that last video, so many people in the comment section were just, if you don't like it here, go home. New Zealand is perfect. How dare you talk about this country that way? Blah, blah, blah. There's just this almost attitude of not talking about your problems and not bringing up issues. And that is really disappointing to me. I think in order to be healthy, in order to live in a country and feel safe and feel like you can be yourself, is to be open and honest. It's okay that there are problems going on in the country. The whole idea is that we all come together as a society and start to make things better for everybody. We want to be more inclusive. We want to be more socialist. We want to be happier living amongst each other. And I just don't feel like New Zealand is quite there yet. Although it does seem like from an outside view that New Zealand is a very open and progressive country, on this point, I feel like they're failing. 4th point on this list is a reiteration from the first video, and that is drivers. The longer we've been here, the more dangerous driving situations we have witnessed. So many dangerous overtaking around corners in areas where the person on the other side of the road, like most of the roads here are 2 lanes, one direction, the other in the other direction. And someone will start to overtake when a car is actually coming the other way, and that person driving the opposite way has to slam on their brakes to not hit this person who's passing you. And we have learned very quickly to pull over and let people pass when it is safe. And it is not always safe. A lot of these roads are extremely windy and very narrow where there is no spot for you to pull over safely. So what we typically do is we try to speed up just a little bit, not speeding like over the speed limit, but we speed up a little bit so that we can get enough space when it is safe to pull over. But so many people here are so incredibly impatient that it doesn't matter that that road is not safe for you to pull over on in order for you to let them pass. They're going to pass you anyway. And it's honestly terrifying. If you have any anxiety driving in Canada or the USA, I've driven quite a bit in both countries, you're going to have a really bad time in New Zealand. On the main roads where there's more than one lane, it's fine because you can just sit in the cruising lane. You don't have to worry about people passing. They'll use the passing lane. Easy peasy. But so many of the roads are just one lane and it's scary. Honestly, it is really terrifying at times, and I just get so anxious. And this is a huge deterrent for me because I love exploring, I love traveling, and you do have to use a vehicle for a lot of that kind of stuff in this country. We live on a really busy street, and we often hear people squealing tires going around the really tight corner that's beside our building on like this super small little rural street that's like a 50 zone. People are ripping like 80 kilometers an hour. Squealing tires, like burning rubber. I think a lot of people in New Zealand think that they're race car drivers, which is just dangerous. I don't know. I don't like it. I really think it's a big deterrent. Number 5 on this list is safety. So I did mention that this was a huge bonus for New Zealand because on paper, yes, New Zealand is a safe country compared to most countries in the world. And huge respect for that. I think it's one of the last countries in the world that you can actually let your kids out to go play and not be worried about them getting like snatched. However, New Zealand is the only place I've ever been to in my life, in the world, that I have actually felt unsafe. And this is why. So I was going for a walk in the middle of the day, probably right after work time, so like 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon. Sun was out, lots of people around, out for a walk, totally normal, down the street in a really small town. Never had an issue before. This particular day, there was someone who was obviously on drugs and they lunged at me. They tried to grab me. I tried to get away from them. I was screaming at them, telling them to leave me alone. This is in broad daylight. This person followed me and waited until there were no other people around in order to do this. I was terrified. I have never felt that anywhere else in my life. I've been to the US many, many times. I've been out walking in a pretty dangerous city, Calgary, at night alone, and I've never ever felt this unsafe in my life. Once I got a safe distance away from this person, they were watching me from afar. I ended up calling the police. The police took some details down and then didn't really do anything. I ended up getting a call about 4 hours later saying, "Hey, do you want to make this like a formal complaint?" And I was very confused because they had not gone out and tried to find this person at all. I was very lucky that nothing happened. I was very lucky that in the moment I decided to fight instead of trying to run away, because I really think this person would have tried to drag me into the bushes that were really close by, and whatever happened after that, who knows? I'll never know. Thankfully, I was able to get away. So here's my theory. It's totally unfounded. It's just a random theory. Most people here think that we're American. We sound very similar. There's not really any like visible differences between Americans and Canadians, especially for white people. So we get pegged as Americans all the time, especially on the South Island. People always assume that we are American first. It didn't happen as much on the North Island. They would typically assume we were Canadian. But on the South Island, I don't think we've been assumed Canadian once. Most people think we're American. And I think Americans have a bad reputation. So I think people instantly, when they hear my voice, I get looks, I get glares. And it makes me feel like I don't belong here. It makes me feel like I'm not welcome here. And that's a really, really horrible feeling. Number 6 on this list is distance. So New Zealand is really far from everything else. If you love to travel and you want to go abroad often, you want to go to places like Japan, Southeast Asia, Europe, USA, Canada, you want to just like go across the globe and see all these things, it's really far away. And because it's so far away and those flights are so long, it's going to be really expensive. So to tie into a point I made in that first video, because New Zealanders make quite a bit less money for the same jobs as their Australian counterparts, you just have less disposable income. Number 7 is the alcohol tax. I don't drink a whole lot, so maybe this is a surprising thing to bring up. But one thing that I really dislike about this country is that for craft breweries, my partner and I absolutely love craft breweries and we support them at every chance we get, but they are charged the same amount of alcohol tax as the big breweries. So the big breweries here, I guess, would be DB Breweries, Lion, which I think is an Australian brand. There are a few like really big breweries that own a bunch of the smaller guys, and they pay the same amount of alcohol tax as your local, super tiny mom and pop craft brewery that is barely getting by. Just since we've been in New Zealand for the last like 9 months, I think there's been 3 or 4 craft breweries that have actually gone out of business. And this really sucks to see. And I don't know if there's something that has to be done with lobbying the government in order to change that, because these small businesses, these small craft breweries, really shouldn't be paying the same amount of tax as these massive corporations that make like millions and millions of dollars in profits every year. That's super unfair. And it sucks because it does make it difficult to support these guys sometimes if you don't have the disposable income to spend like double the amount on beer, because that is frequently how much the craft beer is compared to the big boy stuff. And number 8, the last item on this list is weak currency. So this is really tough if you want to travel abroad, like we mentioned earlier, how far away New Zealand is. But if you're going to be living in New Zealand permanently and your job is in New Zealand dollars, your money's just not going to go as far, especially if you're going somewhere like the USA or Europe. It's not very strong compared to these other currencies, and that can be just a big bummer. You not only have a high cost of living and a lower wage, but you're spending a lot more money to go and travel overseas. I think New Zealand is an amazing country to live in if you've got money. If you're rich, you've got like a really good job that pays really well, you're going to have an amazing time. But it is not a good spot to live in if you like to travel on a budget and you like to get those seat sales where it's like, ooh, it's $100 to fly here. You're really not going to find that in New Zealand unless you're flying domestic. It's definitely not a budget country. So like I said in the beginning of this video, I really love New Zealand. There are so many positives, but it is important to share these negatives. These are my personal opinions. You don't have to agree with them. If you don't, move on. And thank you so much for your support and watching this video. Leave me a comment down below if you have anything you'd like to add. If you want to dispute one of my points in a constructive way. See you guys in the next one.